I do wonder if honestly it's even going to be not in this book, but in a future book that we actually really get the information. But damn if I'm not going to eat all the breadcrumbs as we go along.
I stay hungry, okay?
Stay hungry.
Hansel and Gretel over here. We're just following that trail. Welcome back to the Book Fantasy Podcast. We, Addison and Lorraine, are two best friends who explore the world of fantasy through books, shows, and movies, but with a heavy emphasis on books. Today, we are continuing our Heir of Fire coverage with chapters 31 through 35. And with this section, we have officially finished part 1 of Heir of Fire. And, oh man, was it an action-packed chapter? Honestly, between the lake monster escape and then the backstory on Rowan, I just feel it was information. Maybe it wasn't information, but there was just a lot going on for me to process. Yeah. So.
Oh, see, I'm still tired of boring old Rowan. Like, give me all the Manon, the Abraxos, baby Abraxos and the flowers falling off a cliff and flying. I was all about that.
I love that too. It was so cute. I could just imagine him sitting perched in a field, just like side-eyeing Manon, sniffing flowers and being like, "You're not telling me what to do, bitch. I'm not playing today."
I love how much attitude Abraxos gives Manon because, nobody treats Manon like that. The only person who gets to treat Manon poorly at all is her grandmother. And even then, it's not really in an attitude way. It's just, I'm the boss of you. You do what I say. So I love it.
Yes, I totally agree. And I can't wait to talk about it. So as a quick reminder, we will be discussing chapters 31 through 35 specifically, but it is likely that references to all the books we've covered so far will come up as well. And this includes TOG, Com, and Tab. If you haven't finished these books and you don't want spoilers, make sure you pause here and then come back when you're caught up. Otherwise, this series is brand new to us, so you won't be getting any spoilers for the rest of the series. But, of course, you'll get plenty of unhinged theories from us. Furthermore, we would like to remind everyone that this is an adult podcast where we will have explicit conversations, explicit language, or potentially triggering topics may be discussed, so please be mindful of that and adjust accordingly. Housekeeping. So, if you are a consistent listener, then you probably noticed we've had another gap in our regular episode schedule. And if you remember, I don't know, a few episodes back when I was like, I hope nothing bad happens in my life now that Addison's kind of gotten settled and everything. Well, obviously that was a lie. And nature had other plans. Hurricane Helene, I don't know how much people watch the weather news and everything, but this hurricane was pretty fucking bad. It was really bad for Western North Carolina, which is where I live. And obviously, several other states were hit by this as well. So my heart really goes out to everybody in North Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, Florida, South Carolina, Virginia. I don't know if I missed any other states, but it's been rough. I put 11 days, but I think it's probably been a little bit longer than that, like 12 days or so since the hurricane hit. But I finally got internet back. So we are coming on today to finally record. And once again, our schedule has gone completely out the window, but we're going to keep trucking along to get caught up.
Thankfully, Lorraine is okay, but obviously her safety and well-being has been the priority. But it was just so funny because we got behind and we were really close to getting caught up. And I was like, this is so great. And Lorraine was like, yeah, but stuff always happens. I'm like, no, it'll be fine. And then quite literally an unprecedented historical natural disaster. Like, what are the odds? But, we're here. And just to demonstrate our dedication, as soon as Lorraine got internet back, she's like, let's record. Because we love you guys that much.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I really have been fortunate. Like, just my boyfriend has a business that I work for in our house and everything. We have not experienced anything bad, but I know plenty of people just in the area. I mean, literally, you walk a block down from where we live and along the creek and stuff, things have just been fucked. Like, it was crazy to witness it in the first several days after. So yeah, if I sound cheery, it's not because I don't care. It's because I'm trying to focus on the positive and just kind of, keep trucking along. But if anybody has, seen anything on social media, please just keep people in this area and other affected regions in your thoughts, because there's still a lot to recover from. Mm-hmm. I know many people that don't have power yet. We still don't have running water. So that's kind of our last thing that we're waiting on. But there's been so many people that have been displaced, and a lot of people whose homes and businesses have just been totally destroyed. And I'm not sure how long that's going to take, but it's certainly going to take a lot longer than other things for them to get their lives back together. So yeah.
It's a lot. It's heavy out there. So those of you that are in affected areas, or I know Hurricane Milton is coming too for the Tampa area.
Florida.
So please stay safe and remember that your safety and well-being is number one priority.
But in the meantime, we will be here doing our best.
Your second priority is entertainment, and that's what we're here for.
So next, if you are reading along with us, then next week's episode will cover chapters 36 through 39. We are continuing just to shorten our chapters a little bit, just to help us turn episodes around quicker. The next several episodes are going to be a little bit on the shorter end, but we're going to try to bust those out. And you're probably going to see several episodes drop in quick succession. So stay on the lookout for that.
Unless another hurricane comes and there's nothing we can do.
I'm a knock on the wood today. Please don't say that.
Okay. Sorry. My bad. You're right. That was bad juju.
Yeah. No bad vibes. Okay. Good vibes only. So,
okay. Deal.
And then next, Addison, where are we at with the Onyx Storm countdown?
All right. I'm so glad you asked. Today, the day we're recording, is October 9th, and there are 104 days until Onyx Storm is released.
Ooh, 4 days from the 100-day countdown.
I know. Yes. Honestly, I think we're recording when it will be like 100 days, which 100 days feels like nothing. I'm like, 100 days? I can do this.
We're getting close, everybody. Finally, if you are enjoying the show, then the very best way for you to support us is to rate our podcast, leave a review, and share it with a friend. So here's what we would like you to do today. Right now, whatever device you're listening on, open up your app and go ahead and put in a rating right now, or a review, whichever one you prefer. Either of those options is great, and it helps us on the podcast platforms, or sharing it with a friend. What better gift than a free book buddy or book club to give to somebody? So right now, open up that phone, put in a review, and we cannot thank you enough.
You're so goofy.
I know. All right. So that is all for housekeeping. And let's get into the episode. We will start with the book report for chapter summaries, and then we will dive into an analysis and offer theories for each chapter. And finally, we will share our favorite moments. With that being said, Addison, please give us the book report.
Happily. Oh, how I've missed doing this. Chapter 31. Eat it, Manon said to Abraxos. Manon struggled to get Abraxos to eat his meat treat because all he cared about were the pretty flowers poking through the snow. In a last-ditch effort to bait him into eating, she tells him that if he won't eat it, then she will. Manon took a single bite and then spat it out everywhere. The meat had the same foul taste that the men of the Omega possessed. She decides she will hunt fresh meat for Abraxos and manages to catch a mountain goat, but not before she does a thorough roll around in the goat's blood and shit. Ew. Manon is called to speak to Mother Blackbear. Mother Blackbear, I did it again. Damn it. I even proofread it. Oh. All right. Manon is called to speak to Mother Blackbeak, and surprise, surprise, she ain't happy. She tells Manon that the Yellowlegs have been airborne for 3 days already, and that she wants the 13 airborne by tomorrow evening, and if they aren't, don't bother coming back at all. Manon takes Abraxos to the eastern side of the Fang Mountains, where the men taught the hatchlings are reluctant flyers. And it's a battle of wits. The harder Manon tried to prompt Abraxos, the harder he tried to ignore her, even going so far as to pretend that he couldn't hear her. But Manon insisted and took an Olympic-worthy running leap onto Abraxos' back. An outraged Abraxos began to thrash, and he fought to buck Manon off, and in his panic, he slipped off the western cliff face right towards the steep fall to the pointy rocks of death at the bottom. Manon's world tilted down, down, and down as they plummeted into open air. Chapter 32. Manon held onto the saddle for dear fucking life as Abraxos plunged down the cliff face. As they fell, she frantically screamed, "Open your wings!" And with a piercing shriek, Abraxos flung open his wings, and just as quickly they were soaring away from the ground. Manon and Abraxos took their first flight together, soaring up and up over the peaks of the mountains, and because no one was watching and because she did not care, she flung out her arms and savored the freefall, the wind now a song in her ears, in her shriveled heart. As the sun spilled over the horizon, Manon and the 13 assembled and the new orders were given. From now until War Games, they would train, every morning until breakfast. She told the 13 that there was no time for bullshit or egos, that they would fly together as one, or they wouldn't fly at all. Chapter 33. In the week that followed, there were no more bodies and no hint of the creature's return. Instead, Celaena spent her days trying to light a single candle without incinerating everything in sight. And to her dismay, Rowan had an endless supply of candles. When the rain returned, so did Emrys' stories. Celaena finally worked up the courage to ask Emrys for any stories he knew of about Maeve, on the off chance she could glean some vital information about her. And so Emrys told stories about the Fae Queen well into the night. Celaena picked through the details and committed them to memory. She was about to ask for another story when she caught the motion in the trees. It was a massive mountain cat, or was it? In a flash, the mountain cat became a tall, broad-shouldered Fae male whose name was Gavriel. Celaena overheard a brief snippet of the conversation between Gavriel and Rowan before they disappeared together. Out of the goodness of her heart, and not at all because she was nosy as hell, Celaena took some stew and bread to Rowan's room for Gavriel. Rowan ordered her out, and before she could take more than a few steps, he stormed out of the room. The two argue again, and Rowan once again proves he is the worst person in the world. He utters the cruelest words, "You are nothing to me, and I do not care." He also said a bunch of other mean shit, which we'll talk about, but fuck that guy. I'm sorry, I'm so angry. Okay. Ugh. Celaena walked away without another word. With each step she took back to her room, that flickering light inside of her guttered and went out. Chapter 34. A completely and utterly broken Celaena went through the motions of helping with breakfast, but she was utterly lifeless, a bit of rock and a stream. Emrys shows Celaena the new knife that Malachi had purchased from a merchant from the southern continent, a knife that was from Eelway. This numbness inside Celaena gave a violent crack, and she snapped. Breaths coming too fast, Celaena said, "I do not care." And then she was screaming, blind with rage. Luca and Malachi were across the room in an instant, teeth bared. Celaena let out a low, joyless laugh and walked out of the door. After an entire night of tattooing the names of the fallen onto Gavriel's flesh, Rowan strode into the kitchen and found a grieving Emrys. Emrys gives Rowan the talking to he so desperately needs and tells him to stop beating Celaena down when she clearly needs someone to help her back up. Emrys tells Rowan to help her, if not for her sake, then at least for what she represents, a better world. Celaena walked until she came to a beautiful lake and had herself a good, long, hard cry. Rowan appeared at her side and asked if she wanted to talk about it. She said no, and he simply responded, "Good, because we're going." Rowan takes Celaena to a creepy-ass cave and presents Luca chained in the middle of a frozen lake with a simple task: rescue him. Celaena insists that Rowan is out of his goddamn mind, and Addison agrees, but Celaena relents. In an exercise of precise control, Celaena made her way ever so carefully across the icy lake, while Luca provided very valuable and hilarious commentary. Celaena, using a masterful display of control, uses her magic to free the chain without sinking them both. As she was about to stand and help Luca, she glanced at the ice one more time, where a giant red eye was staring at her. Scary. I know, I didn't know where that chapter was going to go, but that is not what I was expecting.
Nope, not at all. That came out of nowhere. I guess really? I should have expected it. Like, right? You're crossing a lake inside a cave or something, but yeah, really caught me off guard.
In hindsight, like in any fantasy book, you're like, oh, lake and a cave and a mountain that's ancient. Like, okay. Chapter 35. The next 4 words that came out of Celaena's mouth were so vulgar that Luca choked. Celaena urged Luca forward to shore. She made her way behind him, but the creature was swimming ever closer, and then suddenly the world bounced. The creature whipped its long tail against the ice, and Celaena's legs buckled. But she learned fast, and the next time the ice bounced, she stayed upright. Celaena managed to catch up to Luca and gripped him by the back of his tunic, and together they made it to shore just in time. But she didn't stop, not even for a single heartbeat. They kept running and cursing all the way back to the fortress. Celaena instructed Luca to go inside and speak of what would happen to no one, and then it was just her and Rowan left. To absolutely no one's surprise, they begin to argue. Celaena was beyond angry that Rowan had jeopardized someone else on her behalf. She was so angry, filled with so much rage, that she didn't realize she was burning Rowan's arms where she gripped him. A horrified Celaena began to apologize profusely, but he told her to never apologize for defending the people you care about. The conversation takes a somewhat surprising turn, and Celaena rightfully and truthfully, might I add, jokes that Rowan is the worst instructor she has ever had. Although maybe debatable when you think about Arabin, but whatever. Back in the kitchens, Emrys immediately goes into dad mode and gives them both a stern talking to and a hot meal. After thoroughly admonishing them, Emrys tells them an ancient story about a terrible and powerful creature that battled an ancient Fey warrior that carved out its eye and cursed it to forever live under the mountain. Emrys dismisses them after they all promise no more adventures. And by that I mean deadly run-ins with ancient nightmare creatures. Later that night, Celaena tossed and turned but could not find sleep over the guilt of burning Rowan. Unable to shake the thought, she decided to try and absolve her guilt and headed to his room. For the first time in over 300 pages, they actually have a nice-ish conversation. Rowan opened up to Celaena and told her about his past and how he felt responsible for his mate and unborn child being killed. Rowan admitted that he was just as lost as she was, and he wasn't sure he would ever be able to find his way back. But maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back together. Rowan reached out his hand, and Celaena took it and whispered, "Together." And somewhere far and deep inside of her, an ember began to glow. And that concludes part 1, Heir of Ash. Okay. So time to actually read Heir of Fire, which is also the title. So that I know it's a little confusing. Yay!
Nice. I know, that was exciting. I guess we've gotten a lot of the relationship and like background stuff out of the way. So yeah, I kind of wonder how it's going to progress moving forward.
I just want to know, okay, so it's time for Addison's overarching thoughts.
All right, so go ahead.
I feel like in TOG and Com, and Assassin's Blade's a little bit different, but even within the short stories, you figure out pretty immediately what the main tension or conflict is going to be. There's a lot of foreshadowing or signs that point to where it's leading up to. And I don't feel like that's quite as clear in this story. Like, what is going to be the main sense of conflict? I guess a little bit, more with Rowan and Celaena. It's probably going to have to do with the evil creature that's killing people. But, I mean, with Sorcerer and Dorian, you kind of don't really know where that's leading. Same thing with Kale and Adian. You sort of have a sense, but I'm hoping that it's going to become pretty evident almost immediately in part 2, because I've gotten a lot of great information, but I'm like, okay, but where is this all leading? Like, what's going to happen? Yeah. Are we going to confront the king? Are we going to go get the word keys? Are we going to bring magic back? There's so many loose ends. There's so many threads. So it's like, how are we going to weave these together now? So I'm hoping we get that in part 2.
I totally agree. I was trying to figure out how between Manon's storyline, Kale and Adian, Rowan and Celaena, Dorian and Sorsha, like how are those all going to converge?
Yeah.
And will they converge? Because I don't know if all of their storylines are actually going to come back together within this book, at least. But my inclination, if I had to guess, is that we're going to address the creatures that they've been finding in Wendelin with Celaena and Rowan. And then maybe there's going to be some exploration of going to these locations that Adian and Kale have pinpointed that the king produced this
the triangle
to get rid of to get rid of magic. It seems like there's going to be some exploration of those locations. But I don't know that the king is going to be defeated yet. It feels a little too early to go as far as that, right?
Yeah.
So,
if anything, I feel like this book will lay the framework for that, and then maybe it'll even end on a cliffhanger, and then Queen of Shadows will probably start to resolve some bigger issues. But we'll see. I keep forgetting this is only the 4th book in the series. We still have 4 other books. And also those 4 other books get progressively larger. I'm like, oh my God, I still feel like we've only seen a fraction of the world. I feel like we're still going to meet so many more characters and go so many more places.
So
but anyway, I digress. To bring it back to this set of chapters, I have 3 main thoughts. And some of you are probably going to be like, gee, Addison's talking about Shades Rowan again. Yeah, okay, but whatever. So the first is, I cannot be the only one who thinks that Abraxos is toothless from How to Train Your Dragon. Oh, like 100%. I feel like Sarah J. Maas had to have taken inspiration from this. for Abraxos' character. She just had to. They're just so similar. I mean, not like a copy. Like, I'm not implying anything negative like that, but they're kind of that quirky cat-like personality and just the tension in the relationship between Hiccup and Toothless and Manon and Abraxos. It just seems so similar. And also, I just love that movie. So if you guys have not watched How to Train Your Dragon, highly recommend. Even though it's technically a kid's movie, it's so great. But either way, I love Toothless and Abraxos. I love them both. And then I know I sound like a broken record, but Jesus fucking Christ, Rowan is brutal. He's brutal in this stretch of chapters, at least in the beginning. I know I say this every freaking episode, but why? Why do people like him? He's awful. He's done basically nothing nice. And everything he says is meaner. I know it's a fantasy book, but like you think about in the real world, if I told someone, hey, this guy who's like supposed to be my mentor and helping me told me that I would be better off dead and so would the world, and also that he doesn't care about me, people would be like, oh my God, he's a horrible person. Like, you should get away from him. He's awful. Right. And instead people are like, we love him. But I know we've gotten like a lot of comments and messages and stuff about like, just wait, you'll get Rowan's story. His backstory is so sad. And while we do get some of his backstory in this set of chapters, very tragic, I am sympathetic, but I just don't think that what we learn about him in this set of chapters makes up for how horrible he's been. He's not even being mean or even indifferent. He is purposefully being cruel. And I will say, people are like, well, Celaena's no piece of cake, or whatever the phrase is. That was not the right analogy, but maybe she's no peach, whatever. Even Celaena is not purposely cruel. You know what I mean? She can be prickly and unpleasant, but the meanest thing that she's done, quote unquote, is telling Emrys, I don't care. I don't care about your stupid knife or you, which is not nice, but it's not cruel in the same way. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a different level to tell somebody that they should die.
Yeah.
Person to tell them you don't care about what they're talking about.
Yeah. Like, those things are not balanced. And then the last and most important thing, Emrys is my hero. He is the dad everyone needed multiple times in the set of chapters. I love him and word bless him. And that's all I have to say about Emrys right now.
I know. He was so mature, the way he handled all of them. He the real MVP, okay? Keeping everybody together, keeping everybody civil, recognizing the underlying emotional need. His EQ probably has to be off the chart.
Yeah, yes. Well, and I just feel like he gives such dad energy. I feel like he was watching them cursing each other, fighting every day. And he's like, well, just got to let them work it out on their own. And then he finally had enough and he was like, sit down and eat. And we're going to have a little chat right now.
I know.
And they were just like, yes, dad. Even Rowan was like, okay, yes, sir. Which, I mean, for Rowan to do that, I thoroughly enjoyed that.
I agree as well. I love Emrys. Oh, okay. Were those all of your thoughts before we get started?
Yes, thank you. I feel better getting those out now. It's like, it's very cathartic for me to share those. I'm like, okay, like I'm ready for you to proceed.
Well, let's get into the main part of the analysis then. So starting with chapter 31, I titled this one, Flower Power.
Yes, that tracks.
We start off with a check-in with our favorite witch and wyvern combo from a meadow atop a plateau in the peaks of the Fangs, where Manon was attempting to get Abraxos to eat a raw leg of sheep meat. Apparently, Abraxos is truly a cat reincarnated, because the only thing he had any interest in was sniffing the clusters of flowers around him as he laid on his belly, his eyes clearly saying he would most definitely not be eating that sheep meat. Manon couldn't understand his interest in the flowers, since her only use for them was if they had healing or poisoning properties. But she throws the leg of meat in front of his face, only for Abraxos to shove it away with his claw-tipped wing and continue sniffing flowers. Thoroughly frustrated with this endeavor, Manon says, if you won't eat it, then I will, and bites into the raw meat. As if biting into raw meat isn't already disgusting enough, imagine biting into bad raw meat, and you, dear reader, are experiencing exactly what Manon is after trying that nasty meat.
Okay, I'm gonna get it's the sewers all over again. Oh God,
I know. This is off topic, but It's like, oh God, the fridges, guys, after your power's been out and you got to clear out your fridges. Yeah.
I'm assuming you've recently experienced that given your current situation.
Yep. I had some friends clear out their apartment and yeah, it was bad. The smells were pretty awful. And I can only imagine Manon. She immediately spits it out, observing that the meat tasted off, like the men here, and makes a mental note to advise the 13 from touching any more of the mortal men until she knew what the hell was making them taste and smell that way. Despite the nasty tasting meat, Manon knew Abraxos had to eat it to gain his strength, so she tells him, fine, then we're going to have to hunt. I did find that interesting because now we know Abraxos, who already displays characteristics that are different from the other wyvern, is now even more different because he too can tell that something is off. And I think it's especially interesting that a sheep, something I doubt the king would try creating from like dark magic or anything, or even bother influencing, still has this distinct odor and taste, which now makes me wonder if the odor / energy is just more related to general exposure than direct creation or influence. You know, what did you think about that?
Yeah. So the first thing that came to mind when I was reading this part of the chapter is that Manon thinks that might be something in the water. I get why she jumps to that conclusion, but I'm assuming she and all the other witches are drinking the water. So wouldn't they then also be affected similarly?
Yeah.
Right. So that tells me it's not the water. So then obviously, as we've speculated many times about, is that it has something to do with dark magic. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But, and as you already stated, I thought it was really interesting that Abraxos in particular seems to refuse to eat it, but it seems like all the other wyvern eat it with no issues, which means he probably has a sensitivity to it. So that calls into question some about Abraxos himself, which I thought was interesting. And I think you echoed the same sentiment. So there's just a question of what's causing that. Our previous speculation was that perhaps the men were like created or altered in some way, but the king is probably not creating sheep, right? They're probably raising and breeding those. So then it feels like it has to be an exposure issue. Like they're close to some source of magic that is almost like poison. The way I think about it is like radiation. The closer you are to a source of radiation, more likely you are to get radiation poisoning, right? If you're 1,000 miles away, you're not going to be impacted. But if you're, 10 feet from the core, you're going to get fried, right? So I'm wondering if within the Omega itself, there's some kind of source or well or structure that is like a beacon for dark magic. And because of their proximity, but also prolonged proximity, that's why they taste weird or bad. And so does the meat, is kind of my operating theory at this point.
That's kind of my sense as well. And I agree. So now we're just waiting to get more information about the freaking Omega and what the king's been doing.
And once again, Manon's like, she'll worry about that later. And I'm like, Jesus Christ, Manon, like, you don't think it's weird?
Major side eye.
Major side eye. Yes.
Hopefully we get some more info on that soon because I would like to really know. We fast forward to a meeting between Manon and Granny Blackbeak, who comments on how nasty Manon smells. Through Manon's thoughts, we learn that in an effort to ensure Abraxos was fed, she had hunted down a mountain goat. In the process, she'd been shit on and forced to roll in dung to take the goat down. Once brought to her flower-loving worm, Abraxos chomps the goat in 2 bites before continuing with his leisurely flower sniffing. She also reflects on how, no matter how difficult it had been to haul him back to the Northern Fang, he had struggled the whole way and then snapped at the handlers who'd retrieved him. She couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd looked at her with a mute plea, though she didn't pity him because she pitied nothing. I definitely feel like Abraxos can feel the general bad energy in the same way Manon can, as we've continuously been discussing. I don't know why that's important, but I do think that that ability or this difference is part of what brought them together. And aside from that, I think Abraxos just hates being trapped again. He spent his whole life fighting and being abused. So now that he's experienced a world outside of that, he doesn't want to go back. And I definitely don't blame him.
It's so sad. No, it reminds me when we were kids, we had a dog. So we'd like take them for walks. And then one of them in particular, her name was Penny. When we would start to go back to the house, she would like put her head down and drag at. Like she would try to go as slow as possible. You almost had to like, come on, we got to go back to the house. And it's like, okay, our house wasn't a prison, you know, it was a nice place. So I can only imagine how Abraxos would feel going actually back to a horrible prison place. That did make me kind of sad. But I will say, despite it, I do appreciate that Abraxos has a sense of humor because Abraxos had me fucking rolling in this chapter.
I know.
The way he like tried to tuck in his head to pretend like he couldn't hear Manon. And Manon's over there like cursing at him. And he's just like, I'm going to look at flowers.
Yeah.
He was so funny. I know. He's so great.
I love him. Granny Blackbeak goes on to warn her that it had been weeks now and that Yellowlegs have been flying as a group for 3 days. 3 days, Manon. And you're coddling your beast. I want you airborne by tomorrow evening. Don't bother coming back if you aren't. The next day, Manon leads Abraxos back up to the mountain peaks, determined to get him airborne. She brought him to the eastern side, which was meant for the hatchling wyverns and reluctant flyers, since it was only a 20-foot drop and the rock below was smooth enough that the possibility of death was slim. Manon flicks her clear eyelid into place and then commands Abraxos, let's go. Flying. Now. But Abraxos only huffs and curls away from her. She stalks around to his face and commands him again, but being the cat that he is, he tucks his head and pretends he couldn't hear her. She threatens that she'll use his hide as a new leather coat and then reflects on how perhaps this was punishment for something, though she didn't know what. Manon knew that she'd be completely ruined if they didn't get flying, so she says, you have this coming, and then leaps onto his haunches and scrambles into the saddle and digs her heels into his side.
Okay, so when Manon makes a running leap onto his back, did it make you think of the vault event that the Olympic gymnasts compete in? Like where they take a run and then they leap off the vault? That's what it...
No, but I can see that. Definitely see that.
That's all I could think when she did that. I was just picturing her in the Olympic gymnast, like leaping on there.
Sprinting full force.
I know.
Except she's like grabbing on for dear life so she doesn't get bucked off, you know?
True.
Abraxos roars and bucks furiously as Manon clenches to stay on and yells, stop it! She quickly realizes that Abraxos, in his frantic state, wasn't bucking toward the eastern edge, but away toward the western plunge. There was little Manon could do amidst his panicked flapping, and before she can stop him, his leg slides off the cliff and they tumble down into open air. And that ends chapter 31.
You know, I was thinking that's quite literally a cliffhanger. Like in the most literal sense.
Imagine if we'd stopped.
I know.
After one chapter.
They would probably hate us. But see, I always do this thing. In the moment, I feel anxious, but then I'm like, they're not going to die. This character is too main and it's too early. There's some plot armor there. It's too early.
Yep. So chapter 32, I titled this one, He Was a Fairy. Manon has zero time to contemplate her impending death because if she couldn't get Abraxos to fly, there would be no more than a splatter on the rocks below. They shot down faster and faster down the cliff face as the trees and little river grew closer and closer. A gust of wind slams into them, bringing Abraxos upright, and Manon screams, open your wings, open them, and pull them up. Just as they are about to crash to the ground, Abraxos lets out a war cry and flings open his wings. He pumps them to bring them back up. Each boom, the most beautiful sound she had ever heard in her long, miserable life. They soar up the face of the neighboring mountain, and Abraxos, in joy or rage, or for the hell of it, gripped clawfuls of snow and ice and sent them scattering behind, the sun lighting them up like a trail of stars. Abraxos cries out again as they catch a current of wind above the clouds, and it's then that Manon realizes she had not understood what Abraxos' life underground had been like until now, when she hears that noise of undiluted, unyielding joy, until she echoed it, tipping her head back to the clouds around them. Abraxos continues carrying them over the sea of clouds, and Manon, because no one was watching, because she did not care, flung out her arms as well and savored the free fall, the wind now a song in her shriveled heart. That was just such a sweet moment for them, and it was important, I think, in understanding Abraxos more as well. He hadn't wanted to fly because he was afraid, and he never experienced it before. But how freeing. I'm sure that felt so nice for them.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like in a way this is almost a very heartwarming chapter, like when you picture it. So to me, this was just very How to Train Your Dragon coded. So again, fucking love this movie. I'm going to try to talk about it all the time. Please watch it. But okay, wait, you've seen it, right, Lorraine? Don't say no.
Actually, no.
Oh my God.
I know who Toothless is. I've seen enough social media related stuff about him to like know of him, and I know about the movie, but
okay. I know we have a lot of work to do, but I demand that you watch this as soon as humanly possible. You must watch it. Okay, well, for those of you, our audience, for our followers that have watched this movie, the scene where Hiccup first fights with Toothless, like this feels so similar to me. There's so many parallels. And then I bet you've heard this audio, Lorraine, but it's like the music that plays in the movie is what the same like music I heard in the scene. I think it may be copyrighted, so I may not be able to put in the episode, but if I can, I will. But if not, you should listen to it and read this chapter because it just fits so perfectly. And I just thought this was really nice scene. I got really emotional during this scene for whatever reason. It was just really nice. It was very well written, so I thoroughly enjoyed it. Not a lot of analysis. It just kind of more of an emotional reaction.
I agree. It was a good bonding moment between Manon and Abraxos and like a turning point for them as well. So
yes, I think so.
Later that day, Manon sits atop Abraxos surveying her 13 at the mouth of the canyon run. They were assembled in a formation of 2 rows of 6 behind Manon, with Astrid directly behind and Sorrel claiming center in the second row. The 13 had trekked 2 miles to the first canyon run, where they would have their first official flight together as a unit. This canyon made for an easy takeoff point since Abraxos' wings were currently too damaged from the many beatings he had endured in his life. She instructs her clan that they'd meet there every morning from now until War Games before their afternoon training with the rest of the other Cubbins. They were to tell no one. She goes on to state they wouldn't be flying in close quarters and says, let the Wyverns sort out their dominance, but they are going to fly tight as armor. There will be no gaps and no room for attitude or territorial horseshit. We fly this canyon together or we don't fly at all. And if that isn't just the most shiver-inducing speech, I love the witches so much. And I love Manon's commitment to the 13 as well.
Dude, Manon is really all the witches, but Manon specifically is the queen of the rallying speech before the championship game.
Yeah.
The one that's like scares you a little bit, but also inspires you. And you're like, damn, every time.
Yeah, I agree. Manon surveys the witches and Abraxos does the same because what he lacked in size, he made up for in sheer will, speed, and dexterity. He sensed currents even before Manon did. Her final instructions are that they'll continue doing this exercise over and over again until it's perfect. Then, with a don't fall behind, she and Abraxos plunge down into the canyon below. And that ends chapter 32, an epic chapter.
Fly.
I believe I can fly.
It does. The song is processing as you. God, for the millionth time, I wish we could have freaking real music in our episodes.
I know, if only.
I know. Oh, copyright. Damn copyright laws.
In YouTube.
Boo.
Anyways.
Yeah. But no, great set of chapters. Nice to see some action with Manon and Abraxos. And I feel like it resolves some of the big questions of like, how will Abraxos be a functional wyvern and how will he lead the charge against others? So obviously he can fly now. So I feel like he's only going to get better from here.
Yeah. I'm so excited for them. Moving on to chapter 33. I titled this one Bad Soup, but I don't remember why. So we're going to find out.
I was just going to say, I don't think I get this. I don't get this one. Oh, I think
it was supposed to be a play on like good soup. Have you heard that audio? It's just good soup. Okay, maybe not. Maybe that's a little too specific. But
that's a little, yeah.
We're going to find out. I think it'll come back to me as we refresh on this chapter. So this time we check in with Rowan and Celaena, and it's now been a week since they investigated the body at the other fortress. There hadn't been any more dead bodies or hints of the creature that had killed them either. Having mastered shifting on command, Rowan's latest training task was focused on mastering her fire by lighting a single candle without incinerating the surrounding area. Unfortunately, this was proving to be much more difficult since she had yet to produce anything more than a tendril of smoke and a bottomless appetite from all the energy her magic needed. Outside of trading, Celaena had come to enjoy all of Emrys' stories about the legends of Gwendolyn, and she listened intently every night while she washed the dishes. On this particular night, Celaena was scrubbing a copper pot as Emrys finished up the story of a clever wolf and a magical firebird. During a pause, Celaena, for the first time ever, makes a request to ask Emrys if he knew any stories about Queen Maeve. She figured perhaps he would know of stories that hadn't reached Aurelia, and if the stories about the skinwalkers had been true, if the immortal stags were real, perhaps she could glean something vital here. I do feel that there are more incidents with Maeve that Celaena has yet to reveal to us, but it's continuously clear that Celaena does not trust Maeve. So I want to learn more about all these backstories.
Yep, and neither do we. We don't trust Maeve as far as we can throw her, which ain't far at all. Yeah. No, I definitely had a similar note. I feel like specifically that exact quote that you pulled out, I had the same thing, where I think that that is really strong foreshadowing about the information that we are given is important. But I also think it points to that any future stories we hear about Maeve should maybe not be taken as like gospel truth, but they are very likely to be true or relevant or have details that are relevant. So yes. I think any information, story or otherwise about Maeve, I think we should use to build a sort of context for her character, because I think this is, I mean, it's pretty heavy-handed implying that likely it's true, especially if the sun stags were true as well as the skinwalker, which is what Celaena's own thoughts echo. So I agree with her line of thinking here.
And I did find this story to be interesting. So Emrys tells a story about Maeve and her sisters. And according to the story, long ago, before a mortal king sat on Wenlin's throne, fairies, both good and evil sorts, walked among everyone. All of them were ruled by Maeve and her two sisters, Mora and Mab. Mora bore the shape of a hawk, representing Rowan's bloodline, and Mab bore the shape of a swan. But Maeve's wildness could not be contained by any single form. He goes on to retell the history of the sisters, and we learn that Mora and Mab had fallen in love with human men, and then they'd chosen to yield their immortality. Some said Maeve forced them to give up their eternal life as punishment, while others said they wanted to, if only to escape their sister. So I found that story to be pretty interesting for two reasons. One, what does it mean that Maeve couldn't be contained by a single form? Does that mean she can shift into whatever she wants? Or that perhaps her powers are different from those of Mab and Mora's, or from just normal Fae in general? And two, I'm not sure what to believe about Mab and Mora's immortality. Is that really something that you can just give up? To me, immortality seems like something that is, obviously they have it because of the magic that's running in your blood. So how would it be possible for you to just decide you don't want it anymore? Personally, it seems more likely to me that Maeve would use her magic in some capacity to take it away, because I really just think magic is the only thing that can undo something that is magic in nature. What did you think about that story?
Yes, so I have many thoughts about this. So we'll start with Maeve, because that's kind of where we left off. I called out the same thing, especially that whose wildness cannot be contained by any single form. And especially as a callback to when Celaena is like first meeting Maeve and she's thinking about the descriptions of Maeve she's heard is like she turns into a creature so horrible and dark that basically no one can describe it. No one lives long enough to, I guess, share what form it actually takes. I also wonder if that meant that Maeve can shift into so many forms, and that's part of what makes her so powerful and dangerous, because she can go unnoticed and undetected, right? It's probably not like, I would imagine not every single Fae knows that Rowan is a hawk, but probably a lot of people do, right? After hundreds of years, it's kind of hard to hide your animal form. So when we see a hawk, people are like, oh, hey, there's Rowan. It's really hard for Rowan to sneak in undetected with other Fae. But Maeve, hypothetically, if she can turn into anything, she could pretend to be an animal or, sneak in all the time. That was kind of my first thought about it, specifically to that kind of comment about Maeve. So then I started thinking about Mab and Mora and Maeve and like all their forms and everything. So I wanted to make a commentary about the forms that they can shift into, just as kind of more of a world building note. So I know we talked about in a previous episode way back, and I think it was like in chapter 8, about how maybe that what Fae shift into is influenced by bloodlines. And I feel like this is confirmation that maybe it's not true for all of them, but it definitely happens because Mora was a hawk and so is Rowan. And we know Rowan descends from Mora. I don't think it's necessarily like a guarantee, like you turn into what your ancestors did, but there probably is some kind of, I guess, familial connection. So I just want to note that as like a world building thing. The second thing it makes me wonder is, on that same kind of vein of thought, if King Brannon, the great stag of the north, is descended from Mala, the sun goddess, because as we learned in the last set of chapters, there were sun stags. And so I wonder if he's like a descendant or a splinter group of that. And then also more world building. I just want to note that Mab's shape was a swan. So we should look out for any swan references or characters who can shift into a swan, because maybe that's a relation. And then like kind of to circle back to your second big question is, I agree with you that I think to destroy a magical property or capability, it has to derive from magic, right? Mm-hmm. I don't see how it could be any other way. I'm 50-50 split on whether they gave up their immortalness or whether it was taken away, because on the one hand, it does seem like Maeve is pretty awful. So maybe they were like, yeah, I do not want to live forever because I do not want to fucking be around you, right? So maybe they did give it up willingly to get away from me. Maybe they found the love of their life. They made a deal with Maeve, like, you leave us alone. In exchange, I'll give up my immortalness to you. So then I'm like, is that a power that now Maeve somehow possesses? But also, Maeve reads as a horrible, evil person. So it also seems extremely likely that she would strip them of their immortality. So I probably leaning more towards that, but definitely something is up with that. For sure.
I agree. Especially if Mab and Mora know Maeve, and we have bad feelings about Maeve, but Mab and Mora, as far as we know, seem to be good Fae. And so I cannot imagine them just deciding that we're going to leave the Fae to Maeve. You know, if Maeve is truly bad, like we suspect, why would they just be like, oh, okay, like, bye, peace, Maeve, take the lead, right. You know?
Yeah.
I cannot imagine them wanting that. So then I strongly do believe that Maeve had something to do with why they lost their immortality. But we'll see. That stands to be confirmed.
I would really enjoy the backstory on Maeve, Mora, and Mab and their origin story and stuff. I don't know if we'll get like a full thing. I do feel at some point there is going to be some information revealed about that, but I'm beginning to get more and more curious about that. And I feel like because we're just such excellent deep divers, the seeds of that have been planted from the beginning in this book. And so I feel like we caught onto it early on. I do wonder if honestly it's even going to be not in this book, but in a future book that we actually really get the information. But damn if I'm not going to eat all the breadcrumbs as we go along.
I stay hungry. Okay.
Stay hungry.
Hansel and Gretel over here. We're just following that trail.
I want to be Gretel. Isn't Gretel the one who escapes? Hansel gets eaten, or do they both escape? I don't remember.
I don't remember either, but Maeve's definitely that granny witch in the woods, okay? She's gonna...
Dude, she freaking is. Between her and Baba Yellowleg.
Okay, to continue. Celaena then asks if Maeve ever mated, and we learn the following. Maeve had only ever come close to mating with whom rumor claimed was a warrior with a clever mind and a pure soul. Unfortunately, he had died in a long ago war and had lost the ring he'd intended for her. And since then, Maeve had cherished her warriors above all others. They loved her for it and made her a mighty queen whom no one dared challenge. So for one, honestly, I just don't see Maeve as being a relationship girly. She seems way too keen on power and conquest to want love. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
Thank you. Okay.
And then second, do you think that this ring that is mentioned is the same one that pops out of the sword that they find in the cave with the monsters later on?
Wait, what?
Remember that sword with the ring that they find in the cave? And also, well, I had this thought that it was later, but I can briefly mention it now. Remember, Emrys also talks about the story of the warrior that had carved the eye out of the creature?
Uh-huh.
Do you think that is the warrior that Maeve supposedly mated to? And also, he seems like he came from somewhere else. So now I'm like, does that mean Maeve came from somewhere else?
Whoa. For those of you who are listening, my jaw is on the floor. Just absolute shock. I didn't even, wow. Okay. Oh my God. Well, I'm reeling, guys. I am reeling. Woo! Because, like, don't get me wrong. I definitely had notes about the ring and the sword and everything that Rowan finds. And I have thoughts about that in a Fey Warrior. I mean, obviously, we're just speculating here because we don't know the actual numerical timeline. But that feels very possible. And the fact that they're mentioned in the same, set of chapters.
And Emrys is the one telling these stories. And as we know, or it's becoming very apparent, these stories are really not just stories. Okay. They tend to be rooted in truth.
Right.
So
it's hard because we get such a little snippet here, but it's totally possible that's the same ring and the same person, because it did say long ago, ancient Fey warrior and all that. And we know Maeve is quite literally, in Celaena's words, older than dirt. Okay. I'm just headcanon. That's going to be it now. Those are the same people. Those are the same people.
Think so too.
That is an excellent connection. Oh my God. Yeah. And even if it's not, I'm going to pretend that it is. I'm going to pretend that it is. Because you have to think too, I'm just like spiraling here, but if you're magic and you lose something, is it ever really lost unless it's lost in like a perilous situation, aka in this creepy cave with an ancient monster, right? That does feel like it's lost. So that is super interesting. And we know that the Fey warrior didn't die by the creature. Like, he carved out its eye, presumably escaped. So that would align with him possibly then still dying later.
Yeah.
Ooh.
And we know that sword is important because it got picked up. And then Celaena pockets the ring and like the ruby and all that stuff from that sword. So I'm like, this is relevant in some way. And it's associated with this Fey warrior, which means this Fey warrior was probably important.
We'll talk about the sword more when we get there, but that is definitely significant. I mean, it's pretty heavy-handed in the chapter, but it's also magical, and I have some evidence to support that. So
yeah.
Yes. Okay. I'm loving this. Yes. To answer your question, yes, I think they're the same. I hadn't thought about it until you said it, but yes, I do.
Woo. All right. Oh, I'm excited about this. I feel very energized. So
me too. I'm like picking up my book. Like, can I read while I'm listening to you also at the same time?
Okay. Emrys continues with the stories of Maeve well into the night, painting her as a ruthless, cunning ruler who could conquer the world if she wished, but instead kept to her forest realm of Doranel, planting her stone city in the heart of a massive river basin. And then again, what is going on with Maeve? If Maeve is powerful enough to, quote, devour the world, then why didn't she? And the devour the world phrase coming up again is obviously very ominous and increasingly indicates that Maeve is evil in some way. But also, why hide out in Doranel? Why are you hiding? If you're so powerful, who are you hiding from and why? And is there something about Doranel specifically that caused Maeve to choose it as her supposed resting or hiding place?
Yeah. I didn't give it as much thought as that. I thought maybe it's just in a very defensible position. Or I know we've talked about before in a lot of fantasy books, a lot of times ancient creatures or people can sense like where magic is deeper or more strongly rooted. And so I thought maybe there was a magical element. But I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, on the one hand, she is powerful and probably could defeat a lot of people, but there still are enemies out there that could get her. So, like, why not put yourself in a quite literal fortress where it's even harder to get to you and then send a bunch of warriors out to do your bidding all the time?
I don't know. We'll see. Yeah. Again, anything that we learn about Maeve, I'm going to question it because something is going on. We just don't know what yet.
For sure.
Celaena committed everything she had learned to memory and tried not to think about Rowan, who had willingly sworn a blood oath to the immortal monster who dwelled beyond the mountains. But before she could ask anything else, a sudden motion causes her to borderline choke on her blackberry pie. A giant mountain cat trots from the forest, heading straight for their door. She quickly realizes the guards must know who the cat was, and then in a flash of light, it transforms into a tall, broad-shouldered male. Rowan quickly shifts, and the two bro out in greeting. Celaena strains to eavesdrop as the man states, "I've been looking for you for 6 weeks. Lorcan said you were on the coast. Then the twins told me the queen had been all the way out there and returned alone, so I came on a hunt." We learn that the man's name is Gabriel, and Celaena wonders if this warrior was one of Rowan's mysterious friends. She doesn't know why, but it suddenly bothered her to remember that Rowan had a life outside of the fortress and that she had grown to care if he acknowledged she was there, that she existed. Then Rowan guides Gabriel to another door, stating, "Tell me what you want and it will be done." Later that night, out of sheer curiosity, Celaena decided she would bring up a tray of food to them. She brings up the tray and knocks, but then has a mortifying thought that perhaps Gabriel was there for a more intimate reason. Ooh. Like, what, girl?
That was one of my favorite moments. I just picture the look on her face where she's like, gonna be nosy. And then she's like, oh. And then when his shirt's off, when she opens the door and she's like,
yep. What's going on? Yeah. A voice snaps "what" from behind the door, and Celaena eases open the door to see a half-naked Gabriel laying on the work table, and Rowan seated next to him with a variety of flattened needles and a vat of dark pigment. Rowan flatly tells her to get out, and Celaena notes that the tattoo on Gabriel's body was in the same old language as Rowan's. She asks if he wants the stew, but Rowan just tells her to leave it, making it very clear from his tone that he would bite her head off later. She sets the tray down and then backs out, stating sorry to interrupt, realizing that whatever was going on, she had no right to be there. She shuts the door and then leans against the wall in the hall, reflecting on how stupid it had been for her to think he would share personal information with her. Despite this, it, quote, hurt more than she wanted to admit. Before she could head back to her room, the door flings open and Rowan storms out, and his livid anger had her riding that reckless, stupid edge again, and clinging to the anger was easier than embracing the quiet darkness that wanted to pull her down, down, down. So she starts a fight with him. Celaena explodes to say she'd prefer he just slap her instead of reminding her again and again how worthless, awful, and cowardly she was. She continues, stating, "You didn't even bother to tell me you'd be unavailable. If you'd said something, I never would have come, but you just left me downstairs." A familiar rise of panic and pain wells up inside her with the last words, but she whispers, "I have no one left. No one." I was kind of thinking that the delivery of this moment of vulnerability was definitely not great, but it's clear that even with Rowan's cold attitude, that Celaena had come to rely on his presence as a means of comfort, even though things were still unfamiliar to her. I did find just the transition of everything, how quickly the emotions exploded, was a little bit weird to me. I don't know. Maybe I was reading it without the right tone or something, but it just seemed very sudden onset for the situation. I guess knowing what we know later on, I can understand how it just went from sorry, let me leave to fuck you, let's start a fight.
Yeah. It was a little jarring. I didn't notice it as much. I do think that maybe Sarah J. Maas is relying on the history between the two of them and how volatile the relationship always is to kind of springboard this conversation. I think then also what we learn later about Rowan's backstory with his mate and everything, when she says, "You left me," I think that is meant in hindsight meant to be a trigger for Rowan, right? Because he quote unquote left it. Like there's a parallel there. And so also I think it's fair to say that both of these individuals are extremely depressed and not mentally well. And so, you know, emotions be running high. Emotions be running high. It wasn't as jarring to me, but I do see how it kind of goes from like 0 to 100 very quickly. Very quickly.
Yeah, for sure. And it only gets worse from here. So
don't remind me.
Unfortunately, Rowan definitely did not care whatsoever because his response was this: "You are not owed an explanation for what I do outside of training. I don't care what you have been through or what you want to do with your life. The sooner you can sort out your whining and self-pity, the sooner I can be rid of you. You are nothing to me, and I do not care." This, of course, immediately knocked Rowan straight back to 0. Or honestly, more like -10, because I am dumbstruck by how rude that was. She basically just says that she thinks of you as a friend, and your response is, fuck off. Like,
yeah.
And again, like we talked about, we know that the phrase "you left me" is like a huge trigger for Rowan, but still, I'm like, dude, she was doing something nice.
Well, and I just feel like even a complete and total stranger, you can tell when someone is hurting, right? And so even if it was someone I actively disliked, you know, you don't kick someone when they're down.
Right.
absolute worst thing you do is like politely disengage and just like, I'm so sorry for you, and then leave. But to sit there and to so explicitly and purposefully say, I don't care about you. It's like he was like, what's the meanest thing I can say? Let me pick that. You know, he's the worst person in the world. I'm sorry. He's just so awful. What I said at the beginning of the episode is still true. It's not that he's indifferent or even mean or unpleasant. He's actually cruel. Like what he is saying is intentionally and willfully and purposely hurtful. And that is really hard for me to get around. And you think about the difference of like when Nehemia died and Celaena attacked Chaol, quite literally almost murdered him. And what she said was, you will always be my enemy. And even that, like, mean overreaction, blah, blah, blah. Well, you spin that a lot of different ways, but like it wasn't cruel to hurt him. You know what I mean? It's just, why do people like Rowan? Don't get it. Somebody help me understand. Because I'm not getting it.
I know. I am beginning to see or understand why people say that they're mirrors of each other. And I think that to some extent, both of them for a long time have had this reaction of it's easier just to not care about anyone or anything because that way you're less likely to get hurt, right? Because when you care about people, then if something happens to them, you set yourself up for misery and sadness or whatever. But still, I'm like, you're again 300 years old. Have you not learned by this point that it's better to have loved and lost than to not have loved at all?
Yeah.
Maybe.
I'm not. I've read that. I've seen that they're whole like mirror images of each other and everything. And I get that in the sense of they've both experienced a lot of trauma. They're very broken.
Yeah.
But the way that they deal with it feels very different. And that's what I'm kind of like, that's not a mirror image.
That's true.
And also Rowan's mean. So
yeah.
I want to let Rowan.
I know. I think it's going to take a lot of retribution to get to a point where I'm like, okay, Rowan is fine. We'll see. So this, of course, only serves to unleash that damned hollow silence that pulls Celaena into her depression as she thinks it would have been nice to have one person who knew the absolute truth about her and didn't hate her for it. It would have been really, really nice. Then she turns and walks toward her room as the flickering light inside of her goes out. And it was so sad. Just when you thought there was progress being made, it just goes to shit. And it's so heartbreaking because I think she'd finally reached a place where she realized that she needed to open up to people about her past in order to get the closeness that she desperately needs. But then when she finally does, it gets smacked down and it's just awful.
It just kills me. I'm like, you opened up to Rowan. You opened up the worst possible part. Like, why not Emrys or Luca?
Right.
Like, people that are actually kind to you. Luca's offered to talk about anything. There's so many people. And you were like, I know, I'll talk to Rowan. When I read this part, this last line, it was just gut-wrenching. It was absolutely gut-wrenching. And then I also do have to point out from like the analytical side, what this is a reference to specifically is in Calm when Nehemia tells her, don't let that light inside of you go out. And this is something that is referenced repeatedly throughout Heir of Fire, where Celaena repeats it to herself, usually in her thoughts, don't let that light go out. And that's sort of her motivation for continuing to follow through on the promise she made to Nehemia. And so when you think about the loss of Nehemia, how Celaena's been processing, and then this interaction with Rowan is just what breaks her because she really feels like there's no one left that cares about her. And that's just devastating. It's just devastating. And will I ever forgive Rowan? Feels very, very unlikely right now. Very unlikely.
I know. After we learn about his past, I'm sure that was a very traumatizing thing. Like that must be awful, you know?
Right.
So I'm trying to be kind of patient with him too, but still, we haven't gotten enough background or page time with Rowan to be invested in learning why he is the way that he is and having that empathy for him at this point. So a lot of what he does, I'm still kind of like, that was unnecessary.
We need a tab, but for Rowan, you know, like a few short stories that were formative for him.
Yes,
that's what I feel like we need. Yeah.
Anyways, that ends chapter 33. Moving on to chapter 34. I titled this one, No Snacks for Luca.
Oh, I love Lucas so much in this chapter.
I
I like to think that I am like a Nehemia or Celaena, you're like a badass character. In reality, I'm Luca, a nervous talker who would be like, "Did you bring snacks? It smells weird in here. Should we leave? You want to leave? Yeah." Like that's who
I'm a growing girl.
growing girl.
He lots
Luca
to
was
eat, so.
great. He's the comedic relief we did not know we needed.
Celaena awakes the next morning in a trance of what seems to be another wave of very deep depression. The usual breakfast rush passes quickly, and Emrys, being in good spirits, shows Celaena a new knife that Malachi had gifted him. The knife, engraved with lotus blossoms, only serves to fuel the numbness inside of her. When Malachi excitedly announces he'd gotten the knife in Eelway, Celaena snaps and loses it on everyone in the kitchen. Overwhelmed with memories of Nehemia and the night her parents had died, Celaena snaps to say, "I do not care." Luca attempts to reason with her by stating, "Alentia, don't be rude," but this only prompts a spiral from Celaena, who reflects on all the lies Nehemia had told which had resulted in her death. Then she shouts back, "Leave me alone. Keep your goddamn lives to yourself and leave me alone." Emrys looks at her with tears in his eyes as Luca and Malachi growl at her, a family protecting their own, and something Celaena certainly didn't perceive herself as part of. So she lets out a dead laugh and leaves the kitchen.
To state the obvious, this is really gut-wrenching. I mean, it's awful that she's being mean to them, but I think this is a breaking point for her. I think this is where the weight of feeling and basically being entirely alone has really hit her. I mean, she really does have no one. And I was also thinking about it too in the context of, since her parents died, she has basically never had anyone else that loved her unconditionally. Arabin certainly did not. His love, quote unquote, came with so much manipulation and strings attached and chaos, right? And then Sam, who probably did, the timeline that they were actually together, like in a loving relationship, was like, what, 2 months, if that? You know, it was very short period of time. And then I think in the beginning, she thought Kale loved her unconditionally, but I don't think that he does. I think he has a lot of reservations. And I really do truly mean unconditional in the most literal sense. Her parents loved her despite any and all of her faults, right? And I just don't think that she's experienced that in so long. And so I think seeing Malachi and Luca immediately jump to defend Emrys, she realized there's some familial unconditional love and that she doesn't have that. And everyone she ever loved is dead or doesn't love her in that way. And that would be devastating to get to that point in your life and be like, wow, I'm quite literally totally alone. It's really sad. It's really sad.
Yeah, I will say her response to these things is not great, you know, and also she hasn't really tried that hard to make an effort with Emrys and Luca. She's been very on the defense, very reserved up until this set of chapters when she finally, you know, asked for some stories for like the first time since she's been there for the past few weeks.
Fair enough.
But yeah, I agree that she's just very hurt. And any reminders of Nehemia or her parents or anything are just really big triggers for her. So we shift to a brand new perspective with Rowan, who had spent the entire night tattooing the names of the fallen warriors on Gabriel's skin. Rowan heads to the kitchen to find it empty, save for Emrys, whose eyes shone with grief as he cupped a mug at the table. He attempts to avoid any discussion of Celaena, but Emrys calls him out to ask, "What are you doing that makes her come in here with such emptiness in her eyes?" Rowan responds that it's none of his concern, but Emrys goes on to say, "I see her slipping away bit by bit because you shove her down when she so desperately needs someone to help her back up." We then also get some important context from Emrys, who apparently knew Celaena's mother. Emrys reveals that Evelyn Ashriver had been his friend and they had worked together in the kitchens. Evelyn had continuously fought with Maeve to get Demi-Fae the rights they deserved within Wendelin, as well as in Revelia until the day she had died. This does give us some important background to help us understand why Evelyn disliked Maeve so much. We know she was a Demi-Fae and Celaena is a Demi-Fae, so she already experienced hardship with being accepted by the Fae in general. And then Emrys also reveals that he had known Celaena this entire time, and all of this information surprises Rowan.
Yeah, it surprised the hell out of me too.
Yeah.
I was like, whoa, I did not think Evelyn Ashriver was going to come up in this conversation. So I was also kind of shocked by that.
I know, and that they'd known who Celaena was this entire time.
Well, I did wonder about that later after reading this, because if you'll recall, like back in the first chapter or second chapter, Rowan is like venting her, and Celaena thinks he can smell who I am, like my Galathinius after blood. So I wondered if all of the demi-fae, or at least some of them, depending on, I guess, what their abilities are, could sense that. But whether they could or not, they knew who she was. Just, I mean, she got the master of her eyes, you know?
That's
and I get
true. Yeah.
why people in Aurelio maybe wouldn't recognize them, but certainly in Wendland, where the Ash Rivers are alive and well, seems like they would put it together pretty quickly.
That's fair. Yeah. Emrys encourages him to give Celaena some grace, stating, "She has no hope, Prince. Help her. If not for her sake, then at least for what she represents. What could she offer all of us, you included? A better world."
I literally got goosebumps. Yeah, I literally got goosebumps reading that. Emrys is just so emotionally intelligent. When he is telling Rowan, I see her slipping away bit by bit because you shove her down when she's so desperately needs someone to help her back up. And I was just like, thank God he's there.
I know.
Right? He needs to be offering some therapy sessions in the kitchen, you know, like food and talk therapy.
Yes.
Because he gets it, man. He gets it. But I liked the scene with Emrys. I said in the beginning, I really enjoyed all the side characters in this story so far. Emrys, Luca, Astron, etc. And so I was happy to see more with him. But what she represents, a better world.
I know.
Yeah, she's so great.
And then this is like a side note. I can't remember if this was previously addressed, but Rowan is a prince because of Mora, like his lineage.
You know, it's unclear. That's not explicitly stated because there's prince by blood, prince by marriage. I assume, based on the story so far and the details we've gotten, that it is based on his relationship to Mora, or his being the descendant of her. But that is actually unclear. It could be a combination, bloodline and marriage. Not really sure. But I think based on what we know, it is from Mora.
Okay. And then my other thing was, he says a little bit how he became a warrior for Maeve and has been working for her for a long time. But if he's a prince, then why did he do that at all? You know, like what was, I don't know. I have a lot of questions about Rowan and his history.
Yeah. I feel like monarchies are a little bit different with the Fae because they live forever, right? In a mortal world, line of succession is pretty easily sussed out, and like the importance based off your line of where you are in line of succession, because they have mortal lifespans. So there's going to be an heir. Whereas when you are an immortal and you live forever, you would have to step down or be killed, which of course, sure, they have like a line of succession. But think about in the hundreds, if not thousands of years May has been alive, a lot of princes and princesses from Mora and Bad and Maeve have probably come along, right? So it's kind of like they're prince in like name and blood, but not necessarily actual claim to the throne, so to speak.
I guess in fairness, in most fantasy books too, and in other SGM worlds, any character that is of a ruling bloodline, typically very powerful, and then also engages in protecting and fighting for everything. So I guess that's probably what that is related to. Not super important of me to ask, but I was just curious.
No, it is an interesting question, though, because I'd never thought about that, the differences between like Fae and human monarchies and how there could be like different dynamics in terms of politics and stuff.
Right.
Because of their lifespans.
Move on. Celaena eventually finds herself on the shore of a tree-lined lake where she sits in a crumpled ball. Despite her best attempts, she couldn't stop all of the emotions that poured out of her when she let out a little whimper. It's then that a gentle breeze carries a soft voice that says, "Why are you crying, Fireheart?" And Celaena instantly recognizes it as the voice of her mother, whose voice she hadn't heard in 10 years. She whispers back, "Because I am lost and I do not know the way." I thought this was very touching, you know, coming off the previous set of chapters where we visit Celaena's memories, and Evelyn had called her Fireheart the night before she had died.
I know. I still think that's just the sweetest nickname.
I do wonder, how did she hear this whisper? And this voice is just like the spirit of Evelyn, like living.
Yeah, I kind of took it as like a kind of a spiritual, magical thing. Or honestly, it's her own subconscious trying to comfort herself. I didn't look to it any deeper than just kind of that shallow explanation. I don't think we're going to start like Evelyn's not going to appear to her or anything like that.
Right. Yeah. Celaena feels storm winds and ice against her skin, and then Rowan appears and sits down next to her. He asks if she wants to talk about it, which she doesn't, so he states that they will be going. She asks where, but he simply says, I think I've started to figure you out, Malin Galathinius. We touch back in after they had journeyed for a 5-mile hike to the mouth of a cave atop a mountain. The snow-capped peak of the mountain represented the barrier between Wendelin and Dornell, and it certainly leaves Celaena with a weird feeling in the thought this was a bad sign, a horrible sign actually, because whatever was in that cave, and if that ain't the truth, to say the least. She follows Rowan deeper into the freezing cave until he stops at the edge of a huge frozen lake, and in the center sat Luca with chains around his wrists. This was definitely not meant to be funny, or maybe it was, but I did chuckle when Luca calls out, I thought you never show, I'm freezing. As if this is just like a fun little exercise or something.
Yeah, I think it was meant to be funny. Also, okay, I don't know why this really bothered me, but obviously on the first read, I don't really know what to expect. But on the second and third read, all I could think about is when Celaena and Rowan first get to the cave and I see Luca, okay, all I could think about are the logistics. So that meant that Rowan would have had to take Luca to the cave, freeze the lake, okay, and chain him to it. And then be like, hey, bro, you wait here and I'm going to go get Celaena, which means he left Luca in that creepy ass mountain cave all alone, sitting over a lake, chained so he couldn't get away.
Yeah.
And that means he was quite literally sitting there and that horrible creature was underneath him the entire time and could have come and just him at any point in time. And just thinking about that really freaks me out. I like the ocean. I mean, it terrifies me. I have a healthy respect and fear of the ocean, okay? Or any deep bodies of water and for the creatures that live there, right?
Yes.
And I just cannot get over being in the middle of the lake, like looking down to a basically depthless lake and just like thinking of all the things that could be living in there. And then to think that he just left Luca. Yeah, it unlocks like a new fear for me. I'm like, no.
I don't want to think about it. Yeah, that's really scary.
Yeah.
And also, really he had to keep it frozen the entire time.
Yes, which, how freaking powerful is Rowan? And Celaena even thinks that later.
Yeah.
Like the fact that he was keeping the entire lake frozen. But he did it from such a distance, too, which is like, Rowan is hella powerful. I think he was a little underpowered. Like in my headcanon, he was a little underpowered. And I'm sort of like ratcheting up his power level.
Yes, I think so too. Celaena notes that the clear ice that showed pale stones and old tree roots at the bottom of the lake, but she asks, what is this place? Rowan's only response is, go get him in your other form. Celaena rightfully states, how dare you drag him into this, but Rowan, devoid of emotion, responds, you dragged him in yourself when you insulted him, and Emrys, the least you can do is retrieve him. She quickly realizes that Rowan was the reason the lake was frozen, and briefly wonders how powerful he really was. But Luca interrupts to call out, I hope you brought snacks. I'm starving.
He's irrepressible. I love him so much.
I know
I said this earlier, but I think he's like a nervous talker. Like the more nervous he gets, he's just like, the stream of consciousness. I can just picture him so vividly in my mind. I just love it so much.
I really like the voice that he has in the audiobooks.
Yes.
I think it fits him so well. Yes.
He's just so cheerful and like he sounds kind of young, but he's just so sweet and lighthearted. And yeah, he's great. I like when he's like, I promise I'll forgive you for all that mean stuff you said if we can just leave and get some snacks. It smells in here.
I'm hungry. Yeah, if only he knew. Rowan goes on to state what he had figured out about Celaena and says, you can control your power in human form, but the moment you switch, the moment you get agitated or afraid, the moment you remember how much your power scares you, your magic rises up to protect you. It doesn't understand that you are the source of those feelings. When there is an outside threat, when you forget to fear your power long enough, you have control. She asks what will happen to Luca were she to fail, and Rowan reveals he would be, at best, very cold and wet, but could also easily die, and she knew he wasn't kidding. Rowan reminds her that control is her key and that she would have to figure out how to free him without drowning both of them, since he wouldn't provide the key to Luca's chains. Celaena shifts and takes some tentative steps onto the ice, which groans beneath her, but after insulting Rowan and giving him a vulgar gesture, she continues on with her rescue mission. She makes it to the edge of the rocky shelf beneath the ice, and her breath hitches as the ice cracks like a spider web. Her magic shudders awake from her fear, but she takes a deep breath to calm herself, remembering that here in Wendelin, she could use her magic and wear whatever form she wished. She continues shuffling across the ice, reminding herself along the way that she was safe. But memories don't like to wait for a convenient time to pop up, and she recalls how she had been banned from the Library of Orinth when she was 8 because she had accidentally burned an entire bookcase of ancient manuscripts after growing irritated from being lectured by a master scholar. She had been relieved to wake up a few months later to find magic gone, along with any fear of holding a book, since she no longer had to worry about burning any more of them, scorching a friend, or burning her bedroom from a bad nightmare. So she had embraced her new life as Celaena, even if that meant her new accomplishments consisted of death, torture, and pain. That made me really sad to read, but it does add to the context of why she allowed herself to forget her identity as Aelin. So I think that was important to know. And also it confirms for us what we'd previously talked about of like what she did with her powers and why she was so afraid of them and everything.
Yeah. No, I think that was very, very valuable insight into her mentality regarding her magic. And I know it's something that we've inferred just based on her thoughts and actions, but I think it was helpful to have her actually narrate that thought out and really draw the difference. And I think it also helped explain why she clings so strongly to her Celaena Sardathian identity, right? Because it was a way to shake off entirely her previous existence, right? It wasn't even just a name change. It was like Celaena Sardathian doesn't have magic that can hurt, you know?
Right.
And Celaena Sardathian, although like she chooses to hurt and that's her accomplishment. But I don't know. I agree that I thought that was really helpful. And I think there's a continuation of that similar evidence when she talks about Melisandre's emissary, which I think we're about to talk about.
So she goes on to remember that when she'd been young, emissaries from Melisandre had come to seek an alliance, but in reality, they've been attempting to scout out information about Aelin and whether she would become a threat or a weapon of war one day. Her continued memories cause another large crack in the ice, and Rowan once again reminds her, "You are in control now. You are its master." Celaena felt as if he knew exactly what was flowing through her head. And this stuck out to me because I think there have been a couple times now where Rowan responds or says something to her that answers something she had been thinking. And I do wonder if Rowan has an ability to read her mind or like something. Maybe I'm misremembering things or I'm thinking about details from other books or something, but I don't think this is the first time that Rowan has. Or it could just be kind of a literary tactic to state that there is a level of understanding between them.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And that's kind of how I was leaning towards, not to mention there's also this kind of element that they can sense feelings or emotions or not thoughts.
Yeah.
But I think a little bit, maybe there's, as Celaena has strong feelings, her power may flare and maybe Rowan can sense that magic and power. So when he sees her like starting to panic, he's like, "You're in control." So you could go a lot of different directions with that. I'm not quite on the train of like, he can read her thoughts. I took it more of like, has a heightened sensitivity to her thoughts, feelings, emotions, reactions, etc., based on what he knows about her. And probably a little bit like his face senses, scenting as well as sensing magic. But now I'm going to be looking out for that the next time that they interact.
We'll see. I don't know. But Celaena begins to hum music to quiet her power. She continues shuffling across the ice and finally makes it to Luca. Luca reassures her that she had nothing to hide because they all knew she could shift, and then attempts to comfort her by stating Sten's animal form is a pig. He won't even shift for shame.
What a shitty gift. Like,
I know.
When I read that, I was like, I would be so angry. Or then I started thinking like, what would be some other like really hilarious animals to shift into? What if when you shifted into a whale?
That would really inconvenient.
Like, how will this serve me? What purpose is this? Like.
Also, being a pig sucks because you'd probably just get hunted as a pig. Like, people would know. They'd want to eat you.
The only thing that would be good for it is if you were doing some spying on a farm.
Right. Like, let me go snuff
meanwhile,
around.
Rowan is a fucking hawk who can fly and is super powerful. Nope.
Yep.
Pig. There's so many funny animals when you think, like, can you imagine shifting into a sloth? Wow.
Yeah. What am I
Yeah.
going to do with this?
Yeah. Like, not useful for transportation. If you shift into a horse, right? Not the most magnificent, but like you can run really fast. You can, carry people, right? That's kind of cool. But no. Fucking pig. Pig.
I understand the shame from that. So
Yeah, same.
Celaena would have laughed, but she was now preoccupied with figuring out how she would remove the chains without burning Luca or the ice around them. She kneels to the ice carefully and eyes the chain, noting that it swayed in the water beneath, which indicated there was a current and Rowan had been constantly sealing the ice. She steadies herself and attempts to pull out a thread of power, only to burn and splinter the ice around them. Rowan, who'd been hunting for discarded weapons, barks control once again as he pulls free a golden-hilted sword. She tries again to release a thin thread of power and this time successfully burns the chains, freeing Luca. Luca is immediately relieved but quickly reprioritizes to ask if she had any snacks because he was a growing boy. Celaena sighs and reflects on the miracle she'd managed to produce, but there's no time to waste because she notices that through the small hole that she had burned, a giant red eye stares straight back at her.
If that isn't scream-worthy, woo!
Once again, we're left on a cliffhanger, but no worries because we are covering one last chapter. Moving on to chapter 35. I titled this one, Houston, We've Got a Worm. Maybe.
Or at least an evil lake creature.
A Loch Ness monster type thing. Yeah.
Woo! Don't even get me started on that, okay? Don't get me started on that.
All right. They best be running their demi-fae tushies off that ice pronto because we've got a Midgard worm-like creature swimming in the lake, as evidenced by the jagged white teeth swimming toward them from the depths. Celaena quickly realizes that this creature was the reason she hadn't seen any skeletons, and that Rowan hadn't been aware of this creature either. She quickly urges Luca to not look down and go with a light shove. She looks at the creature and notes that it wasn't a dragon or a wyvern, not a serpent or a fish, but something in between. It was missing an eye, the flesh scarred around the empty socket, and she wonders if perhaps there was something worse swimming around in the lake.
I have a very brief thought here. So when she is thinking not a dragon or a wyvern, I got very excited because to me, that is confirmation that both creatures exist in this universe and that they are distinctly different. Because I know all in the beginning, we were like, are there dragons? Are there wyverns? And then when the wyverns were introduced, we were kind of like, okay, we'll just use them interchangeably. That's probably what this means. So now I do wonder if we'll actually get distinctly different wyverns and dragons. Ooh. I'm very excited about that prospect. But that's confirmation from Celaena that they are distinctly different creatures and that they do exist, or at least at one point they did exist and she's aware of them. So dragons, you know how I feel about dragons. So I got very excited when I read that.
I'm so excited. I know. I really want to meet a dragon. I really do. I hope we do.
Me too.
Rowan barks at Luca to go faster, who is now halfway across the lake, and Celaena starts her shuffle slide as well. Just as she takes her third step, the creature snaps up from the depths and whips its tail against the ice, sending Celaena sprawling. She manages to maintain control of her magic and shouts for Rowan to get her a weapon. He slides her the golden-hilted sword as he continues focusing entirely on keeping the ice secure as the creature strikes again. Celaena picks up the sword, which has an egg-sized ruby embedded in its hilt and looked as if it had been freshly polished, though it should have shown some wear and tear from where it was found. Notably, a plain golden ring also drops from the scabbard of the sword, which Celaena quickly picks up and pockets.
Okay, so Addison, fun fact about me, one of the many tropes that I absolutely adore are faded, ancient magical weapons, made objects that have great importance. It doesn't have to be a weapon.
Yeah.
Like any kind of object, like the Eye of Elena, right? I love that shit. I get so excited when we got introduced to the sword Damaris and Elena's tomb. I was like, yes, a magical object. So I feel this is very clear that this is some kind of faded, ancient magical object. And even on the first read, I was like, yep, that's going to be important. And so obviously the ruby, or even Celaena later wonders, like maybe it's something other than a ruby. The description of it is very indicative that it has relevance. And then in addition to the context we get from Emrys. But one thing that is like a dead giveaway for me that it's a magical object is that there's no wear and tear on it. Anytime a magical object, but specifically in this case, a weapon is mentioned, it is usually protected against time and aging and weather, etc. And so the fact that it's described as still in perfect condition as if it's been freshly polished is clearly to me indicative that it has some magical properties. And so I desperately want to know more about this. It just screams important historical context.
Yes.
And so I was like super excited about that. And now I'm never going to shut up about that stupid sword.
Oh, I know. I'm very excited. And now Celaena has it in her possession too, which I'm sure is going to come into play. I'm sure we're going to get a battle where she's going to use this sword. So
yeah,
we'll see. The creature's tail whips the ice again, and Celaena bolts to Luca and hauls him to the stone shelf drop-off just as the ice explodes behind them. They make it the final few yards to the shore, and just as Rowan releases the magic, Celaena turns to see the creature attempting to crawl into the ice. As the ice disappears, the creature crouches back into the water, teeth gnashing in hunger. Back on the ground, Celaena hauls Luca out of the cave and out into the woods, Luca chanting a stream of prayers the whole way. Off in the distance, they hear a massive bird-scattering roar, as if the creature had reached the edge of the cave, but couldn't withstand the light of the sun. Celaena didn't stop to consider what might have happened had it been nighttime, and they keep running all the way back to the fortress. That's interesting to me because I do wonder if it really could get on land, because it's lived its entire life in the water.
I don't think it can, because there would be other stories, even if they were few and far in between, of people like seeing the creature or glimpsing it. Maybe it can get on land, but as Celaena speculates, it can't stand the light and the sun.
Yeah.
And it's like, why would it not be out at night hunting? You know?
Right, because the ice hasn't been frozen this entire time. It's only frozen because Rowan did that. So
I kind of feel like it can't really leave the water. Like maybe it could get on shore, like a alligator, like kind of half in the water, kind of half out, but then it has to slip back in. It would be my guess.
Once back in Mistward, Celaena sends Luca off with a warning not to mention anything about what they'd encountered. And then she snarls, "I will kill you," and launches herself at Rowan. They lock in combat, and Celaena manages to get a good punch to his face. Despite the pain, it felt good, and I agree that it was well-deserved. After some struggle, she manages to pin Rowan on his back and hits him again, stating, "If you ever again bring someone else into this, if you ever endanger anyone else the way you did today, I will kill you." Rowan stops fighting back and turns his head to spit blood out, but distracted by the rage that was overcoming her, he manages to flip Celaena instead. He responds, "I will do whatever I please," but then asks, "Tell me why, Aelin," as she thrashes against him. Celaena finally lets go and reveals everything to Rowan about Nehemia's death and how she lied to me because I was a coward and I hate her for it. I hate her for leaving me. She continues begging him, stating, "Please don't bring anyone else into it. I will do anything you ask of me, but that is my line." Rowan lets go of her and then asks how Nehemia died. She reveals how she had manipulated Archer into thinking she needed to be killed via an assassin, and Rowan asks what happened to Archer and the assassin. After revealing she had hunted them to each down and killed them, Rowan responds, "Good." Surprised by his response, Celaena looks at Rowan and realizes she had burned through his clothes, leaving burned handprints on his skin. She immediately apologizes, figuring it would have hurt like hell, and how despite that, he had taken all of it. Rowan holds up a hand and states, "You do not apologize for defending the people you care about," to which Celaena nods but adds, "I'm keeping the sword." She then asks whether the creature could track them down, but Rowan assures her that the fortress had a spell woven around it to keep out enemies. Even magic would bounce off of it. Having decided they were friends again, Celaena jokes with Rowan that he could be the worst instructor she's ever had as they head back to the fortress.
Okay, so I know we've talked a lot about Celaena's character and her grief in the set of chapters, but I feel like this scene with Rowan specifically is really important because it's finally Celaena being able to verbalize what has been so devastating to her. I think the quote is super important, so I'm just going to read it really quickly. When she says, "Because I am sick of it," she was gulping down air, each breath shuddering as the horrific realization she'd been holding at bay since Nehemia's death came loose. "I told her I would not help, and so she orchestrated her own death. Because she thought," she laughed a horrible wild sound, "she thought that her death would spur me into action. She thought I could somehow do more than her, and that she was worth more dead, and she lied about everything. She lied to me because I was a coward, and I hate her for it, and I hate her for leaving me." I think that quote is really, really important because it highlights a couple of things. Is one, she has a lot of self-loathing at herself for putting Nahimi in that position, but she's also really angry at Nehemia for the choices that she made. And I think Celaena is also angry at herself for being angry at Nehemia, but that's a totally reasonable thing, right? What Nehemia did was kind of unforgivable. Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah, a little unhinged behavior. And I think for Celaena to be able to verbalize that she feels abandoned, and that's a huge part of why she feels so resentful and angry and confused. And I think it's important that she was verbalizing it. I am so confused why she chose Rowan to verbalize that too. But I mean, good for her, I guess. So I just wanted to call attention to that because I think that clarification from Celaena herself is really important.
Yeah, I definitely agree. They trudge into the kitchen to a clucking Emrys who chides them for brawling like alley cats at all hours of the day and night, but serves them 2 bowls of stew anyway. He tells them to eat and informs Celaena she would be relieved of kitchen duty through the next day so she didn't bleed everywhere. Meanwhile, Luca and Malachi were both making faces that suggested they should definitely heed Emrys' directions. Celaena realizes she hadn't shifted back yet thanks to some pointing from Luca, but after seeing no one cared, she shrugged and dug into her stew. She eventually does shift, and Emrys brings over a loaf of bread with some encouraging words. He says, "Makes no difference to me whether your ears are pointy or round or what your teeth look like, but I can't deny I'm glad to see you got in a few punches this time." Emrys has many words to say tonight as he continues talking to Rowan, this time, to say, "Don't you think you've had enough of beating each other into a pulp? What good does it accomplish other than providing me with a scullery maid whose face scares the wits out of our sentries?" Rowan's bowed head makes Celaena barely smile for the first time in a long while, but she quickly apologizes profusely to everyone for the hurt she had caused them. Emrys looks wary despite accepting her apology, but he goes on to tell Celaena he knew her mother and that most of the older Fae knew who she was as well. Then Rowan helps clean up the dishes and they work in silence. Celaena hopes that maybe he wouldn't walk away whenever she did find the courage to tell him about the other truth that still stained her soul. They move on to discuss the creature they had found in the mountain lake, and Celaena asks Emrys whether he knew any stories of it. Emrys, being a storykeeper, doesn't need no one, and he relays the following. There was a man who had wandered into Maeve's lands like a fool. He'd had an infection and was brought to the fortress to heal. He told me he found a cave at the base of the bald mountain. He felt like something was watching him from the lake. As he drifted off, he awoke only because the ripples were lapping against the shore. Ripples from the center of the lake, and just beyond the light of his fire, he spied something swimming, bigger than a tree or any beast he had ever seen. What the fool learned that night was this. The creature was almost as old as the mountain itself. It claimed to have been born in another world, but slipped into this one when the gods were looking elsewhere. It had preyed upon Fae and humans until a mighty Fae warrior challenged it. And before the warrior was through, he carved one of the creature's eyes out and cursed the beast so that as long as the mountain stood, the creature would be forced to live beneath it. Mass verse alert! Maybe. I don't know.
There are 2 main takeaways from that I think are important. The first is that the Fae that carved out the eye spoke Fae, an archaic form of the old language, almost indecipherable. Okay. And then obviously, which we're going to talk more about this in a little bit, but the gold ring is from the ancient Fae warrior and presumably the sword as well. And then, of course, your brilliant connection earlier that perhaps it was the same ring that was lost for the male that supposedly loved Maeve, right?
Yeah.
So for me, I don't have any spoilers. I'm going to reference the Massverse, but not in connection to any specific book or series. This feels like a Massverse connection. I really, truly don't have any speculation on who it could be or from what universe or what it could be, but it does feel related. Yeah. So that's all I'm going to say in that regard, because I started trying to think about it and I was kind of started, flipping through Akatar and Crescent City and nothing immediately jumped out to me. And so maybe we'll get more clarification on this as we continue to read. And so then the connection will be more apparent. But at bare minimum, this does read like there is some kind of connection, especially then to where she wonders if it had been let in during the Valg Wars and or using a word key. And we know word keys can open portals to other realms. And so I mean, all of that kind of screams Massverse and an important historical event, or at least that person was important. So
yeah,
I got a lot of thoughts.
Yeah,
but I don't have enough information to go off of to do anything with. Really.
No, I didn't feel like it was referencing any character specifically that we've read in other books, but it just confirms to me that a Massverse, worlds are connected. Somebody from another world had entered into this world currently via, word key, word gates, yada, yada. And that it's possible for that to happen, right? So,
absolutely.
Celaena immediately wonders if this creature had wandered in during the Vogue Wars and how many other horrific creatures had wandered in because of the battles over the word keys, as we just stated. And of course, my first thought is that whatever evil thing was taking people's souls is probably one of those creatures that got in through the portal.
Oh.
And that's why nobody recognizes it. Nobody knows where it's from.
Oh, yeah. See, I thought it was just like really ancient. But maybe it's ancient and from a different world. Ooh, interesting. Okay.
She asked who the Fae warrior was that had taken the creature's eye, but Emrys didn't know. He only knew that the language it spoke was Fae, and it was an archaic form of the old language, almost indecipherable. It could remember the gold ring he bore, but not what he looked like. And this, as we stated before, officially confirms that this ring is going to be important for something as well, in addition to the sword. And then this is now where I had made the connection where I wondered if this is the same one that Maeve's past mate had lost. Just to reiterate, is this the same Fae warrior that was Maeve's partner? Where did he come from? And is it possible that it means Maeve came from somewhere else as well? Or do they meet in this world? So lots of questions. Celaena bites back the urge to grab for her pocket where the ring was or examine the sword and the ruby that might not be a ruby after all, but figures it was impossible and too much of a coincidence, which I was like, no, Celaena, definitely not. You better keep that ring and sword. But now I want to know what the ruby is, because she's like, maybe it's not a ruby. And I'm like, what else would it be then?
Some kind of
magical
bloodstone
object?
or something. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know.
It seems like maybe she should spend some time thinking about that, but knowing her, she probably won't.
I know. Rowan reaches for his water, and Celaena notices the slightest hint of a wince he made from his burns, but Emrys warns them against any more adventures and fighting, and Rowan responds, "We'll try," with a face that yielded nothing. Later that night, Celaena couldn't sleep due to her thoughts about the creature and the burns she'd given Rowan. She knew he should have gone to a healer, but she had the tin of salve left and decides to give it to him if only to relieve some of her guilt. She knocks and enters into his toasty room to find Rowan seated at a work table examining a map marked with the locations of the bodies they'd found. He asks what she wants, but Celaena marvels at the intricacy of his tattoo and his tanned, sculpted body. A warrior's body that had been honed for centuries.
Oh, yeah, she did.
She tosses him the salve and they bicker back and forth, but he takes the tin and then says, "You could heal yourself, you know. Heal me too. Nothing major, but you have the gift." And this is when we get another little reveal about Celaena's powers. She states, "It's the drop of water affinity I inherited from Mab's line." The fire had come from her father's bloodline. And then she says, "My mother told me that the drop of water in my magic was my salvation and sense of self-preservation. I wanted to learn to use it like the other healers, but was never allowed to. They said it wouldn't be all that useful since I didn't have much of it, and queens don't become healers." This is very interesting because we just learn a little bit more about what kind of power Celaena has. But I did think it adds a lot of context as to why Celaena wanted to be a healer in the first place. I just thought it was something she aspired to do, like in another world. But now we know that it's literally because she does have a little bit of healing magic gifted to her.
Yeah, I think that inspired her. I also thought the line where it says queens don't become healers, I was like, Celaena's going to defy the odds. And now again, I'm going to stick to my, I don't know if she'll ever be a healer in a traditional sense, but will she heal the world of evil and magic? Yes, absolutely. She will heal and make a better world. I feel so strongly about that. I know.
Rowan first tells her to go to bed, but as she turns away, he tells her to wait. And then Rowan finally reveals some of his own backstory. Rowan had previously had a mate who died 203 years and 27 days ago, and his tattoo had told the whole story of it. Celaena asks if the other Fae warriors did the same, and Rowan confirms that Gavriel had been tattooing the names of his lost soldiers for as long as he'd been a warrior. He goes on to tell the story of when he started his warrior journey. So, as a young Fae, he had been fervent in his quest for valor and went wherever Maeve sent him for campaigns. At some point, he met Lyria, his mate, who had sold flowers at the market in Dornell. Maeve had disapproved, but there was nothing you could do to alter a mating bond, but it had cost him Maeve's favor. When war came, desperate to prove himself, he took Maeve's offer to fight despite Lyria begging him not to go. He had left her alone, and Celaena remembers how she had told him, "You left me," and he had snapped right after that. Rowan had fought for months, and upon learning Dornell was under threat, he had flown home as fast as he could, only to find that Lyria was both pregnant and now dead. As a result, he had lost all sense of self and hunted down all the males who'd hurt her. But he had been ridden with guilt and shame for failing to notice she'd been pregnant from his preoccupations with his own agenda. He spent 10 years after that wandering around, going totally mad, and feeling basically nothing at all. Eventually, Maeve tracked him down and re-enlisted him to serve her as prince and commander, plus work with other warriors to protect the realm. Since he had nothing and no one left, he wrote his story on his body, made the blood oath to Maeve, and had been serving her ever since. Celaena asks how he came back from such a loss, and Rowan responds, "I didn't. I might never be." But then amends, "Maybe we could find the way back together." Though he didn't apologize and she didn't ask him to, Celaena finally understands that what she saw in Rowan was a reflection of herself. He holds out a hand and says, "Together then," and Celaena studies the hand, realizing that perhaps he was someone who did understand what it was like to be crippled at your very core, someone who was still climbing inch by inch out of that abyss. So she takes his hand and agrees. With that, somewhere far and deeper inside her, an ember begins to glow. And now it's time for part 2.
Yeah, part 2. Woo! So I did have like 3 very quick things to say. The first is,
Okay,
we finally learned what Rowan's tattoo means, which I was excited that we finally learned. To be honest, I was a little underwhelmed. Or rather, it's just completely different from what I was expecting.
Oh.
I don't know if I thought it was going to have more weight or, I don't know, be something more magical. And don't get me wrong, I appreciate the symbolism and it's nice, but I was just kind of like, oh, that's what it is. Like, no, okay, that's fine. Like, it wasn't as exciting as I thought it was going to be. I know that's bad, right? I'm just like, it's just about his dead mate. Who cares?
You heartless, cruel person, Addison.
I appreciate the
just
symbolism.
Kidding.
No, I'm a little bit. Also, I don't like Rowan right now, so I'm like, meh. But I thought his mate story was interesting for a couple of reasons. The first is, I find it very interesting that Maeve disapproved of their relationship. She being a Fae herself, you would think that she would understand that a mate is an uncontrollable bond and connection, right? And it also implies to me that they as a race, or at least Maeve, doesn't value the mating bond in the way that a lot of other fantasy series do. Usually in other fantasy series, it's an uncontrollable bond. It's not like you get to pick your mate. It's preordained by a higher power like the Word or the Mother. And so even if you don't love the connection like between the two people, it's just kind of like, well, what are they going to do? They can't control it. But it does align with our previous impression of Maeve from chapter 8 when she tells Celaena that her mother and father disobeyed her by getting married because their bloodlines were too volatile. All of that is just kind of interesting to me. I don't know if it speaks to how all Fae feel about the mating bond or just Maeve, but I did think that was interesting. And then I also thought something about Lyria's death doesn't sit right with me. I know we're only getting Rowan's perspective, but all of the descriptions of Dornell indicate that it is impenetrable. Like, from a physical standpoint, natural barriers like mountains, but also from a magical standpoint, and also just like quite literally sentries and guards. So how were they able to sneak in undetected long enough to kill Lyria and presumably others and burn down their house? That seems kind of weird to me.
Right.
Now, granted, we don't know how many, what kind of enemies were, like, were they magic or, demon, or I'm sure it wasn't just some mortals who snuck in there, right?
Well, that's what I was wondering is, what was this war? Oh, is he talking about the Val Wars, or is he talking about something else?
I don't know what war he was off fighting. I don't think it's Val, because that would be way long ago. That's older than he is, I think.
Okay, yeah.
That's like way old. But it does make me wonder what kind of enemies were able to do that. Or,
yeah,
I don't know. Something about it seems a little sus to me.
Yeah, there's definitely more to the story, I think,
for sure. For sure. I don't know. We'll see. I just know it's a little fishy to me.
Yeah, everything is really weird. But I can imagine that would be, very, very traumatizing. And he clearly hasn't ever really dealt with that. He kind of just ignored it, boxed it all up, went back to work to just kind of not deal with the pain of that. And so that's probably why he's spent the 100 or so years after that just being an ass, is because
pretty much
he never dealt with it. I would suspect Celaena is one of the few people now that he has probably told about this.
Mm-hmm.
So
although maybe he doesn't tell people very often, but it is written on his body in a language that lots of Fae can read. It's probably not widely known, but it's also not a super secret. You know what I'm saying?
True. Fair enough.
But yeah. Those are some thoughts about that. So I am sympathetic to Rowan. That would be very traumatic. But I still don't think it justifies his atrocious behavior.
Okay, so by the end of this, I was like, does this mean that they are finally kind of becoming friends now? I'm hoping it does, but I don't know. I just want them to be friends and finally stop fighting. Yeah, and stop fighting with each other over like every little thing,
I think it means that they're going to start a new chapter and try something new, because what they're doing now isn't working for either one of them. And hopefully it just means a fresh start and or turning over a new leaf.
Yes. All right. Well, that officially concludes our analysis portion. And now we just have our favorite moments to do. So let's get into that.
I love when Manon is with Abraxos and she thinks, if a plant wasn't good for poisoning or healing or keeping her alive, if she were starving, she'd never bother to learn its name, especially not wildflowers.
I know. I loved everything about Abraxos and the flowers. I had one from that chapter too, where it said he moved to sniff some white and yellow flowers. A nightmare. This was a nightmare. You can't really like flowers. Again, those dark eyes shifted to her, blinked once. I most certainly do, he seemed to say.
Oh, this is so great. I love when Manon and Abraxos are flying, she thinks she had not understood what it had been like for him to live his entire life underground, chained and beaten and crippled until then, until she heard the noise of his undiluted, unyielding joy.
Aww.
I know. So sweet.
He's free. I love Abraxos so much. I would like him as a pet. And I will pet him. And I will give him an entire pasture of flowers forever.
I'm not sure how Ernie and Kelso would feel about that, though.
That's true. No, they would not take it well. Ernie for sure would not enjoy that. But anyways, my next one was in chapter 34 when stuck there and Celaena asks, "Is that why you came? Rowan promised you snacks." And his only response is, "I'm a growing boy. What can I say? I just want to eat." So
I know. Luca was so great this chapters. I love when Celaena goes to take the stew and bread for Gabriel. And as she's about to go in, she thinks the murmuring within went silent. And for a second, she had the mortifying thought that perhaps the meal was here for a far more intimate reason.
And then she walks in and Rowan is shirtless, Gabriel's shirtless on the table. She's like, oh, yeah.
Oh my God, it's so great.
And then my next one and my last favorite moment was from the end of the chapter there, when it says, "Perhaps they would never get out of it. Perhaps they would never be whole again. But together," she said, and took his outstretched hand, and somewhere far and deep inside her, an ember began to glow. It's very sweet.
It is very sweet. I really like that. And last, I love Emrys in all of chapter 35. I love that he gave Rowan the business, especially given at the beginning of the book when Emrys and Luke are first talking to Celaena about Rowan and they're all terrified and no one messes with him. And so the fact that Emrys was like, enough, I've had enough. Like, tells him they'll sit down and eat this and you're going to listen and you're going to hug it out. Like, finally.
He like sets his foot down, but simultaneously he's still giving them food. He's like making sure that the bases are covered, but he's also still like a hard parenting, you know,
like the angry taking care of you. This is like a small side story about me, but once in college I did competitive debate and we had to leave really early for a tournament, and I may or may not have been drinking the night before, and so I literally I went to the debate room like after the party and I slept there because we had to leave at like 5 a.m. and so I was kind of hungover. And one of the assistant coaches, he was so mad. He was like, take this Tylenol, drink this Gatorade. And he just kept like angry taking care of me. He's like, sleep on the plane. We have a lot of work to do. But I just remember him like at the airport and he was like, drink this. He was so mad at me. Such like a big brother and dad thing to do. That's what it reminded me of.
Yeah.
Very fun.
Aw.
I know.
All right. Well, that concludes our favorite moments. And now we've come to the end of our episode. So thank you all for joining us for another episode of the Book Dump Fantasy podcast. As always, we're so glad you found us. So please leave us a review, subscribe to the podcast, and check out our social media pages to keep up with us on a daily basis. That's all we've got for you guys today. So stay nerdy, everyone. And we'll catch you all next week for Heir of Fire episode 7. Bye.
Bye. And stay tuned for some bloopers. I waved too soon. I got excited. I was like, I also had the urge to yawn every time. Oh, damn. Sorry. I think I was going to sneeze or something. I'm trying to mute myself.
Oh. Outside of trading. Ooh, sorry, I had to breathe.
How dare you?
I talked too much without taking a breath at a good time. Fairies, both good and evil sorts, walked among. Okay, I need to pee really fast. I've been holding it, and it's gotten to a point where I cannot hold it anymore.
Okay.
I'll be right back.